We're gonna have multiple people. I just shut the garage door on them. I got them trapped in. I think they're probably trying to get out the window.
That was just some of the footage captured on Officer Brendan Kaiser's body cam relating to the February 20, 2023 incident involving multiple juveniles who were reportedly trespassing in the garage of an abandoned home. Kaiser is a member of the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department, a department that certainly isn't a stranger to accusations of violent or deadly controversy. In fact, the Free Thought Project, which is a group that pushes for police accountability, has been reporting on the LMPD's corruption and violent tendencies for years. And the LMPD was involved in the March 2020 killing of BREONNA Taylor, an innocent EMT who was shot while sleeping inside of her own home. Later that year, Louisville officials agreed to pay her family $12 million to settle a wrongful death suit. No officer has ever been charged with Taylor's death, but the Justice Department charged 4 current and former police officers on August 4, 2022 for civil rights violations, including lying to obtain a search warrant for Taylor's apartment. In December 2022, Taylor's boyfriend Kenneth Walker, through his attorney, announced that the city of Louisville agreed to pay $2 million to settle lawsuits brought by him. Following that incident and the national demonstrations in 2020 over police brutality and systemic racism, Louisville officials banned no-knock warrants, which allowed police officers to forcibly enter homes and search them without warning. Further, after Taylor was killed, the FBI Louisville field office has opened several investigations into LMPD officers. The oldest is a 5-year probe into a SA scandal in the department's Explorer Scout program. This issue first came to light in 2017 when a 22-year-old filed a lawsuit alleging that she was abused by 2 LMPD officers when she was 17 and 19 years old in their cars and homes. The lawsuit also alludes to the fact that the police department and lieutenant who ran the program conspired to cover everything up. In 2017, Mayor Greg Fisher hired a former U.S. attorney to investigate independently and requested an FBI investigation. The federal investigation led to the conviction of 3 LMPD officers for deprivation of rights, attempted enticement, possession and distribution of child materials, and the transfer of obscene material to a minor. It was also revealed that the officers SA'd more than a dozen former scouts in the program. In June 2020, during the protests over the deaths of George Floyd and Taylor, a 53-year-old restaurant owner named David McAtee was fatally shot by the Kentucky National Guard after authorities, including the LMPD, were sent to disperse a crowd that had gathered. However, McAtee and the group around him were not thought to be protesting. Instead, they were violating the mayor's 9 p.m. curfew. McAtee fired 2 shots outside of his home and business, above his shoulder, after his niece was shot with pepper balls in their doorway by an LMPD officer, Katie Cruz. Cruz was charged federally for excessive force for shooting the balls at McAtee's niece, but the case remains open. Then, she was later fired after an internal investigation found that she did not have permission to use the pepper ball gun because the crowd was neither disorderly nor aggressive. During her plea hearing, she even admitted that she shot an individual with a pepper ball while the individual was standing on private property and not posing a threat to Cruz or others. As part of her plea deal, she cannot seek further employment in law enforcement. Another incident during the 2020 social justice demonstrations involved LMPD officer Dustin Dean. During a live broadcast, Dean was captured firing non-lethal pepper ball rounds at a local television news crew. This matter is currently under investigation. However, a statement from Wave 3 TV, who employs the reporter and cameraman who were shot at, said that the crew was not interfering with law enforcement. Following that incident, Dean was put on paid suspension at home from June 2nd through July 29, 2020, but then put on administrative reassignment while the department conducts a Public Integrity Unit investigation to determine if there was any criminal wrongdoing involved in his behavior. That investigation is believed to be ongoing. Yet another investigation was opened up against 2 officers who, from August 2018 to September 2019, reportedly threw large beverages and the containers at Louisville residents while on duty in unmarked police cars.
And the ones who knew what was going on and that they was doing that, how do they get away?
Apparently, they'd bring the drinks into their cars and get close enough to throw them at their targets. According to a news release from the Justice Department, the officers would speed off after throwing the beverages. They both pled guilty to conspiracy to violate civil rights, a federal crime, for their behavior. One of the officers who pled guilty in the drink-throwing conspiracy also pled guilty to conspiracy to commit cyberstalking, yet another federal charge. It's alleged that in the fall of 2020, he used an electronic communication service to harass, intimidate, and cause emotional distress to at least 6 women. He also hacked computer applications belonging to the women and stole compromising photos, videos, and other information that he blackmailed them with. It was also exposed by Vice News that money had been going missing after the LMPD conducted raids. Several witnesses were interviewed, some who were never convicted of a crime, and said that officers seized large amounts of money from them, but then reported smaller amounts when the cash was turned in as evidence. As such, Louisville's Metro Council President David James wants the policies around handling evidence to change. The current policy does not require money that was seized to be counted by the officers at the scene. Why we would not require counting money at the scene when we know we've had problems with this in the past and officers have gone to prison for this in the past seems illogical to me, James said. On that Vice video titled "Money and Drugs Keep Going Missing After Louisville Police Raids," some commented to expose even more bizarre activity by LMPD officers. One man said, "My brother's brand new vehicle was stolen in Louisville. My brother called them multiple times to ask them if they found it. They kept saying no. He eventually found out after it was auctioned off that they found it the very next day after it was stolen. Please do a story on this issue next." He has phone records proving that he called them multiple times to ask if they found it yet. They lied about having it just to buy time to auction it off as unclaimed property. The Louisville police are criminals. Attorneys even told him they couldn't do anything because the Louisville police are so good at legally committing crime. Another said in part, "I lived in the Louisville area for most of my life. I'm from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and live outside of Cincinnati, Ohio now. I can tell you that you are just touching the surface with this story. LMPD won't do a bust on a known drug house if they don't think it's big enough to pocket any money, unless someone in that house specifically ticks off someone on the force. I've been a law-abiding citizen other than some speeding tickets, but I've known some people that have been on both sides of getting busted by LMPD. There are a lot of great cops on LMPD, but I imagine there are still too many dirty ones just being swept under the rug too. Suffice it to say, but the LMPD has had a long history of issues. But back to the case at hand. Last month, 2 LMPD officers responded to the garage of an unoccupied home in the Chickasaw neighborhood, which was believed to be full of juveniles and a suspected stolen vehicle. Kaiser and another officer are seen walking around the garage with their guns drawn. They could hear movement inside of the garage and had drawn their weapon because they did not know who was inside, how many people were inside, and whether the individuals were armed, the LMPD department said in a news release. However, the situation escalates quickly after someone attempts to open the garage door. Kaiser responds by closing it shut with his hands. He then calls for backup because they tried to get out. He said that he had multiple people trapped in the garage, and he believed that they were going to try escaping through a window. But additional officers did not arrive in time because the door eventually opened, and this happened. As you can see by the emphasis in the video, which was released by the LMPD, there is a lot of focus on the fact that Kaiser allegedly had his finger off the trigger, and it seems to suggest that the gun went off unintentionally. However, many others have pointed out the fact that he didn't alert the officer on the scene or warn anyone else with his department that a shot had been discharged, whether he pulled the trigger or not. In any event, despite a bullet somehow being fired, it appeared at the time that none of the officers, the juvenile who was detained, or any of the boys who ran away were injured. But 2 youths later checked into local hospitals after the shooting, and it is believed that they were both injured by the bullet from Kaiser's gun, although both denied being at the location of the vacant home and garage that day. Thankfully, they both sustained non-life-threatening injuries. And attorneys for those injured teens say that Kaiser has a long history of excessive uses of force, which is true. Sometimes perhaps justified, and maybe not so much in other instances. In 2018, Kaiser was exonerated for fatally shooting a man, 42-year-old Isaac Jackson, who, according to the LMPD, threw a knife at an officer. But he was also admonished multiple times, including a brief suspension after he was found to have violated policies on de-escalation during an April 2020 incident. According to his personnel file, specifically he failed to use appropriate language to attempt to calm several people down, and failed to exercise patience and diplomacy. Kaiser was also previously reprimanded for a December 2018 incident when he failed to be courteous, civil, and used profanity towards a juvenile, failed to turn on his body camera, and used inappropriate force on a juvenile. His file also shows that he was criticized in different incidents for being at fault in several car crashes and missing a court date. Kaiser was also sued, along with a gambling house, after a woman walked into a Derby City Gaming, which she often frequents, and was asked by employees for her name and then arrested by Kaiser. She was later charged with trespassing. Rayleigh believes that she was wrongly confused for someone else. It's unclear whatever came of that lawsuit. This officer has a history of red flag behavior, attorney Sam Aguirre said. The department needs to explain immediately why his prior incidents didn't prompt corrective action and training. As for the teens who were injured in February 2023, the LMPD has confirmed that they were all unarmed. Kaiser has been placed on administrative leave as investigations surrounding the incident are conducted. So, all of this begs the question: if the LMPD's forced narrative is wrong, and it can be proven that Kaiser intentionally shot into that garage, could that be considered excessive force? Perhaps. Let's go back to the case around the killing of David McAtee. He was killed after his niece was shot by a pepperball gun. The officer involved in the shooting of the niece was federally charged for excessive force because the girl did not pose an immediate threat on the police or anyone else. She was simply standing on private property. Sure, there was an active curfew put in place by the mayor, but that didn't seem to lessen the punishment Officer Cruz, who shot her, received. And that was just for using a pepperball gun. Sure, those can still hurt when they strike someone's skin, but they aren't real bullets. Cruz isn't even allowed to be a police officer, not in Louisville, not anywhere, because of that incident. When it comes to Kaiser, the argument could be made that he didn't know at the time whether the teens had a gun. But he also couldn't definitely say that they didn't either. They were also on private property, like McAtee's niece, but not property they seemingly had the permission to be on. Again, that can lead to another question. Is simple trespassing, especially of an abandoned property, without the apparent possession of a weapon, a crime that justifies being shot? A reasonable person would likely say no, but only a court of law could make that decision. Only time will tell what will come from this case. As for now, all we know, based on the information provided on the video, is that the LMPD consulted with Kentucky State Police, and Kentucky State Police told LMPD to conduct the investigation. LMPD will then turn over the file to Kentucky State Police for a full case review before the case is submitted to the Commonwealth's Attorney Office.